So now let's talk about the philosophy of Allelu in a presentation called Early Childhood Religious Education from A to Z. A is for active learning. Workbook and worksheet driven programs are not how young children learn best. And there's a considerable body of research, and I've just cited a couple of studies here that are foundational studies in this area. I encourage you to look this up. Considerable body of research that indicates that workbook and worksheet driven programs and learning might even hinder learning in young children. It might discourage them from interest in the material. Kids this age learn best by actually doing, by using all five senses, by being active in their learning. And so it's important for us to look for ways to help children use all of their senses in their learning. That engages their full attention and makes learning fun. When people are asking about the Allelu program when I'm out at conferences and things like that, and they want to see it, one of the things they often ask is, well, where is the child's workbook? And my answer is there isn't one. There is a child's piece that's used a little bit in the classroom and used a little bit more at home. But the primary learning of the child actually happens both in community and then also through active learning that is child directed. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, what that means as we go along here. B is for Bible stories. Kids should know from an early age that God speaks to us in Scripture. It's also important that, and this is one of the things we really try to do with the Allelu program, that we use stories that are appropriate for this age and this level of understanding. There are some stories that really aren't going to make much sense to kids this age, simply because theologically you need a deeper understanding. You need to understand typology and how the old covenant connects with the new covenant, for example, because kids can't understand the connection between the flood of Noah and baptism. It's difficult to teach a lesson like the flood to children this age, although a lot of early childhood curricula include that story of Noah's Ark. um, I would be, of the position that this is not really developmentally appropriate, because in the story of Noah's Ark, all the animals except for two of each die, and all the people on Earth die, except for those people in Noah's family who are on the ark with him. We can understand that story in a deeper context in light of the new covenant and all of those things, but kids aren't going to understand it that way. And so it's important that we use stories, Bible stories, in an early childhood curriculum that are appropriate for that age and that level of understanding. This is one reason why we don't take a lectionary-based approach in Allelu as well, because not every story, not everything that comes up in the lectionary is something we can really teach well to children this age. And I'm not saying that any of those stories are bad, or that we shouldn't include them in our lectionary or anything like that. It's just that, just as God reveals himself to his people over time as they're ready to hear and understand, so we need to do the same thing with our learners. And so there are some things that they're ready for at this age and some things they're not. Stories should follow an intentional scope and sequence so that developmentally appropriate learning goals can be met as well. C is for crafts. Now, many early childhood programs include crafts and artwork and craft projects and things like that. Um, but I think it's important that in a religion program, crafts not just be to fill up time or for something fun to do or to make sure we do something multisensory, although that's important, and that I believe that based on what I've already said. But again, we need to be intentional here. Crafts need to be concrete, visible reminders of the main point of the lesson. So whatever is that thing you really want them to walk away with, be thinking about, how is this thing that we're making a concrete reminder of that? And that also gives the catechist, the religion teacher, a wonderful opportunity to be in conversation with kids as they're making it and talk about, why are we making this again? And what does this remind us of? So that when parents or other family members ask them about it, they'll be able to have those answers and talk about what they learned and why they made what they made. We also want to, in a preschool and kindergarten environment, consider the motor skills of our learners. Make sure that craft projects can be child initiated and child directed, that it's not just something that the catechist or religion teacher is making for the children. D is for developmentally appropriate. Um, there are many different facets of development. When we talk about development in young children, we're talking about many different variables, including cognitive development, how kids grow in the way that they learn and the way that they think and their understanding of different concepts; social development, how they grow in their relatedness and their relationships with others; emotional development, particularly emotional self-regulation, is something that kids are working on at this age, understanding their feelings and being able to regulate their feelings. Motor development, especially those fine motor skills, but also gross motor skills, the big muscles at this age as well. You'll see the fine motor skills in action though more in an early childhood classroom as you do craft projects and other kinds of things that require some of those small muscle skills. Um, and moral development, our understanding of right and wrong and how we make choices. We talk a lot with kids this age about choices and making good choices. They become much more aware of consequences in their environment, the positive consequences when they do well, and the negative consequences when they break the rules. And then spiritual development, the child's understanding of God and their natural capacity for relationship with Him. Of course, as Catholics, we believe that we are all created for a relationship with God. And so it's not so much cultivating or creating a space for God, but rather developing that space for God that already exists within the young person. E is for empathy. Um, so one of the ways that kids at young ages in preschool and kindergarten learn to have empathy for others, learn to understand what something feels like for other people, is that we show empathy to them. We model that. And one of the ways we do that is by reflecting the feelings that we see. When we see kids working on something and getting really frustrated, gritting their teeth and saying, oh, to come beside them and say, that's feeling really frustrating for you, isn't it? Reflecting those feelings when they start bouncing up and down and their eyes light up and they're smiling, you say, you're feeling really excited about what we're doing right now. So reflecting those feelings that we see helps to build emotional vocabulary, and also ultimately helps children develop empathy for others as well. F is for family. Parents are the first and most important teachers of the faith. And so any early childhood program especially needs to have a clear connection to home and a clear mechanism for communicating with parents and cultivating family spirituality. There are some really good multisensory, hands-on early childhood religion techniques that I like for many reasons, but that don't include a good, strong family component. In Alleloo, the space where we chose to include that component is in connection with the family meal. And there are some really important reasons for that. And one of them being, of course, that our faith and our practice of our faith is really built around a meal, a gathering together. Jesus built his ministry around meals. Um, uh, his first miracle was worked at the wedding feast of Cana. His the apex of his ministry when he gives himself to us, body, blood, soul, and divinity, the night before he dies. That Last Supper is a meal. Then many of the resurrection narratives also revolve around meals, from the Road to Emmaus story, where they recognize Jesus in the breaking of the bread, to the breakfast on the beach with the apostles, to other accounts there. And we in Christian practice, as we gather together for the Mass, that Mass, which we also call the Eucharist, revolves around that meal that we have as a community, as a family. So we want to encourage families in the domestic church to also gather around the table and make those meals a sacred time, and a time not only when they gather and share a meal together and communicate with one another, but a time when they're also talking about the faith. And so in the Alleloo program, we have a mechanism for doing that. The child's take-home page in Alleloo is actually a placemat for the family meal each week. I'll talk a little bit more about that when I do the Alleloo unboxing, so that you can see a little bit more about that aspect of the program as well. But in that piece for family, one of the things that we have that's very important is a section in the lower left called Ask Me. Those are particular questions that we give parents um, to ask their children about what they've learned. Very often parents will ask young children, so what'd you learn about today? And kids won't give them much that's too specific, and so it's kind of hard for them to have further conversation on it. So we're actually feeding parents those specific questions, and also we give them the answers just in case. And we also want to give them some other resources for family and parish connections as well. G is for games. Kids need to move and they love games. And so playing some simple games can be really helpful in the learning process and in building community. And we have some simple games throughout Alleloo, some simple movement activities together. Um, the picture that I have here is not specifically an activity from Alleloo, but it's something that really complements the section on feelings in Alleloo. It's a game that I play with young kids called Feelings Ball, where we roll the ball back and forth across the circle, try to get somebody new each time that it's rolled. And whoever catches the ball talks about a feeling they have today and why. Like, I'm happy because it's my birthday at the end of the week, or I'm sad because my pet fish died, or something like that. Just, that's a non-competitive game. I think non-competitive games are better because they help us build community rather than being very individualistic. We've got to consider the goals, that we have in this kind of setting. I'm not saying all competitive games are bad, but what is our goal here in a setting where we're doing formation? It's to build up that community. H is for helpers. Facilitate collaboration between the children. In an early childhood classroom, you're naturally going to have kids who are on very different levels. And part of that is just a function of how short their lives have been so far, right? So if they're 3, 4, 5, 6, just a few months makes a bid difference. And so those who have earlier birthdays might be ahead of those who have later birthdays, for example. Um, uh, and I think one of the things to keep in mind is that when kids need a little extra help with something, we don't always have to be, as adults, the ones who give that help. When we see some kids who are able to do a little bit more, or maybe a little older than the other kids, we can facilitate collaboration between the kids, and always have this idea that in our group we help each other. In mixed age groups, of course, the older learners, again, can help the younger ones. And in the same age groups, I think it's helpful to identify some talents and some areas of need and pair students in activities according to that as well. I is for independence. Um, so child-directed activities have been shown in the research to be the most effective in learning new content in early childhood and maintaining a positive attitude toward learning. One of the foundational studies that was done in this area was done a number of years ago by Rebecca Marcon at the University of North Florida. And she compared different styles of early childhood classrooms and learning, and found that the more kids were able to direct their own activity, um, and guide themselves through the learning process, the more they had a positive attitude toward learning and the more they achieved in terms of their learning. And so it's important that we're not always just kind of sitting in front of the kids directing the whole session, but that they actually have opportunities for child-directed experiences to guide themselves through the learning process. Um, Allelu is an early childhood religion program that includes child-directed activities in every single lesson, for this reason. And I think it's so important to be able to do that. Um, One of the ways that this happens in a typical good early childhood program is that the group meets in circle times to discuss the different activities that are available around the room, things that are set up intentionally for kids to guide themselves through. And also in that circle time, we might demonstrate those activities. And then we break up into smaller groups to explore those different centers around the room, and to allow kids to guide themselves through the learning process. J is for Jesus. The former version of the directory that we had quoted Catechesi Tradendae, that beautiful letter from Saint John Paul II on catechesis, saying the definitive aim of catechesis is to put people not only in touch, but also in communion and intimacy with Jesus Christ. Everything in our faith revolves around that central axis of Jesus. Therefore, it makes sense to introduce Jesus first. As that foundation. So, when kids are in early childhood faith formation, there are a lot of different approaches that people take and a lot of different, ways that they begin. My strong bias is to begin with Jesus, because then we connect everything back to him. Present Jesus as king and as friend, fully divine and fully human, fully divine and fully human. We want to present all of those different aspects of our relationship and our understanding of Jesus Christ. K is for kindness. Some of the most important lessons learned during the early childhood years are in the area of social development, including things like how we share, how we take turns, how do we make friends with others, what does it mean to respect others' feelings and to respect their space? How do we solve problems together? One of the things that we can do that's very effective with kids this age is to coach appropriate social behaviors. So when we see kids handling something badly with a peer, instead of just correcting them or separating them and putting them in timeout, to get beside the child that seems to be having the biggest struggle, to encourage them to step back a little bit if necessary. I mean, especially if they're getting aggressive, to take a breath and then say, let me see if I can help you through this, and then guide them through handling the social situation appropriately. When we coach them through the situation, we give them facilitated practice, and it makes it more likely that they'll handle it well next time. It's much more effective than simply talking about how they should have handled it or giving them a negative consequence for handling something wrong with a peer. Coach them through those social behaviors. L is for liturgy. One of the things we want to do is always connect what we're doing in formation, especially with children this age, to the larger gathering of the body. And so connecting our formation sessions with the liturgy is so important. It's important to create a classroom altar, and you'll see some information about how we do this in Allelu when you see the section on uh, uh, setting up the room, setting up the space. You'll see here an example of the classroom altar that we recommend for Allelu. We recommend that you have the color of the liturgical time of year, a few sacred objects there. You might also have a magnet board, and this might be where you have your Allelu magnets, because they'll gather in that sacred space for the story times as well. On the left-hand side of the slide here, you also see a pop-out mask kit that that OSV offers as well for teaching kids about the Mass. This is kind of fun to use when we're teaching about the liturgy as well. But we want to make sure we always draw that connection to the liturgy, and particularly our experience in the Sunday Mass. M is for music and movement. Music and rhythm are great tools for learning and remembering new information. Um, when I'm talking with catechists in the United States, I always ask them how many know all 50 United States in alphabetical order. And there are always a couple of people that raise their hand, because when we're young, there are some civics teachers in the United States that teach a song called 50 Nifty United States, where the states are sung in alphabetical order in the form of a song, and that song sticks in your head. And so even today, even though I learned that song in fourth grade, I wouldn't be able to forget it. All 50 states in alphabetical order. In Canada, you have perhaps fewer provinces to remember there, but in any case, music is a great way to memorize things and to learn new information. And movement resets the attention clock in the brain. The average attention span up to age 20 is about equal to age in minutes, which means in an early childhood classroom, especially in preschool and kindergarten, kids have very, very limited attention spans. The good news is that when we use a multisensory presentation, and particularly when we use movement, we can kind of reset that attention clock in the brain and kind of keep them engaged. So we want to make sure to build in lots of movement as well. In the Allelu program, we have lots of music. Every lesson has its own song. And if they learn the song, they learn the main point of the lesson. You'll see in when I do the Allelu unboxing, the CD that comes with each age level. We're also working toward getting that music online for download for you as well. But if you should find yourselves with a CD and not have the capability to download it into the computer, because I know some computers now don't even have a CD drive, you can feel free to email me, and I can get you MP3 versions of those songs. You have permission when you buy the Allelu kit to share a copy of that music with every child in the class, so that they can also take that music and use it at home as well. N is for nature. Young children are naturally curious, and they love to explore and learn about God's creation. Go outside when possible, and bring nature into the classroom at other times, especially when seasons change. Incorporate books that help children learn about various aspects of creation. O is for organization. Disorganization really saps our energy. Organization leads to better behavior. We want to have our room arranged proactively. We want to have activity supplies ready. You have an activity supply list in every lesson in Allelu. We try to keep you really organized, where you can see each stage of the lesson, exactly what you'll need, exactly what you'll be doing. I think it's a very straightforward lesson plan layout in the Catechist Guide. Put away, and there's even a little clock, by the way, on each section that shows how many minutes we anticipate that each activity would last, so that you can plan for the hour and a half, however much time you're doing your Allelu sessions. Um, Also important that if we're in space that is shared with other groups, that we put away any items that we don't want our learners getting into during that session, especially preschoolers, because they're not only curious with their eyes, they're curious with their hands. And so they will get right into items that look interesting to them. P is for prayer. It's important that that we teach our learners how to talk with God, that we form them in their conversations with God. We have opportunities in Allelu in every lesson for group prayer in the sacred space. We want to teach spontaneous prayer, and we do some of that as well as teaching traditional prayers. It's important that we also use icons and pictures, especially for those visual learners, those more visually oriented learners. Um, we also want to have some other concrete or sensory-based tools for prayer. One example of that would be these rosary readiness chaplets that my wife used to do when she taught kindergarten religion. Um, she worked at a Catholic school, and some of the parents at the Catholic school really wanted their kids to learn the rosary, but she also knew that kids in kindergarten have about a 5 or 6 minute attention span, and the rosary lasts a lot longer than 5 or 6 minutes. And so her solution to that was to create these rosary readiness chaplets, where she ordered in bulk some miraculous medals and a little crucifix for the other side. We have a company here in the U.S. Called Autumn that I think you can order from as well in Canada, or you probably have something analogous to that, where you can get a multi-pack of a couple dozen of these pretty inexpensively. Um, and uh, Also, she used just this plastic string and then glow-in-the-dark plastic pony beads. So you would tie the miraculous medal on one side, string 3 beads on, tie the crucifix on the other side, and then you start there at the crucifix with the sign of the cross, and then you pray the Our Father, the Hail Mary, and the Glory Be. So 3 prayers that we would pray in the rosary. And then you have the miraculous medal on the other side. Q is for quiet time. It's very important that we know how to use pacing and tone, particularly when we're talking with a group of preschool and kindergarten learners. Pauses can help build patience. They can calm learners. They can also prepare them for listening to God in prayer. Children this age are used to sometimes media that's just always coming at them very quickly and in a very excited tone. But we also know that the effective use of pauses, of voice modulation, is very good for them and teaches them to modulate themselves as well. One example of that done well is, can be seen in the popularity of Fred Rogers for decades, and the way that he connected with young children. He was a master at using pacing and tone. And said, I don't think everything for young kids has to be fast and loud. And I would certainly agree with that. R is for relationship. The attachment and relationship area of the brain is growing at its fastest during the first 5 to 6 years of life. And, I think sometimes we see learners that are formed beginning in first grade or second grade, at age 6 or 7, and maybe go through Catholic school or through parish formation for the next several years. And then maybe they reach adulthood and they leave the faith. And we wonder what happened there. We thought, that they had a foundation, they had all those years of religious education. I think one possibility is that even though they learned a lot of knowledge about the faith, they never really fostered an attachment to Jesus and his church, never really had that relationship with Jesus and the church. One of the things that they teach us as child psychologists is that, when we look at brain growth, the part of the brain that's responsible for attachment and relationship is growing at its fastest in those first 5 or 6 years of life. And so this becomes a really critical period for learning how to connect with others, learning how to establish relationships. I have done in my clinical work with children a lot of work with families that are fostering children to adopt them, children that have been removed from their homes through the child welfare system because of abuse or neglect. And I always know that, or maybe not always, but often, um, parents and kids are going to be able to bond with one another much more effectively and efficiently if those new parents get the kids in the first 5 or 6 years of life. And it's simply because this relationship and attachment area is more malleable during those first 5 or 6 years of life. It's not that it's impossible later on, but it's just easier when that attachment and relationship area of the brain is really growing. Um, and so I think if we think of that and and understand that about how human beings grow and how they learn and how they change, then we understand the critical importance of fostering a relationship with Jesus and his church in those first 5 or 6 years of life. So we need to be very intentional about the material that we present, the topics that we present in an early childhood program. It can't just be a collection of Bible stories. It can't just be a lectionary-based approach. It needs to be focused on Jesus and the Christian community, Jesus and his church. And so that's why Allelu focuses there. We really focus on fostering that relationship with Jesus and the church. And then all of the other things that they learn about the faith will fall into place, I think, in the context of that relationship. S is for the saints. Children need heroes. And it's important that we introduce kids to a variety of saints and share developmentally appropriate anecdotes about them. In the Allelu program, you'll see a saint for every lesson. Every lesson has its own saint. There's always a saint of the week. Information about that saint of the week also goes home in that child's piece. And dressing up as saints or acting out stories of saints can be a fun, informative activity. We do a lot of acting out of stories of saints as well. And you'll see that in some of the activity options in Allelu, particularly at those younger ages. T is for tasty treats. Kids love to make their own snacks, and easy to assemble snacks that are connected to the lesson can be a fun and multisensory and tasty way to learn. We always want to be conscious of food allergies and dietary restrictions, though, so it's important to know that when parents register their children for the program. But Allelu does include some optional activities to have some treats that go with the lesson theme as well. U is for us. In the end of these early childhood years, particularly in that transition in kindergarten from age 5 to 6, we have movement from what moral theorists like Kohlberg called pre-conventional moral reasoning, when kids are really only making moral choices or making choices, behavioral choices based on what are the consequences? Does something good happen when I do this, or something bad happen when I do this? Do people say I'm a good girl or a good boy if I do these things? So there's a movement from that kind of moral reasoning to an understanding of the fact that the world works according to rules, and that when we're with groups of people, we have rules together for how to behave. And this helps us to then facilitate this understanding of this group identity as Catholics and followers of Jesus. And so we can say, we're all friends of Jesus, and friends of Jesus treat people this way. We share with one another, and we use our words instead of fighting. And so we can begin to facilitate that understanding, this understanding of kind of a social understanding of morality that's based on our identity as followers of Christ. V is for virtues. These years are an excellent time to foster positive behavioral habits and lay the foundation for virtues. And we focus a lot on that in the Allelu program as well. W is for witness. Everyone who's baptized is a missionary. And so we want to help children share what they've learned through having a clear main point each lesson, practicing talking about and living out the faith. We have a sending time. That's the last stage of the Allelu lesson is the sending stage, where kids are sent forth to take the good news of God with them. And as I mentioned before, sometimes the crafts that we make and the hands-on tools can be great assets to us in helping kids do that. X is for extra planning. Okay, I know I cheated a little bit here, but the only other thing I could think of was xylophone. And most early childhood classrooms may not have one of those. So at least not in a religion class. So extra planning, always have something ready for children to do as they arrive. In the Allelu program, we call that the welcoming time, and kids have an activity that they can do right as they walk in. Have some extra activities for the kids in case something doesn't work out or an activity takes less time than you anticipate. We have lots and lots of additional activity options in Allelu. Every chapter has a section called bonus pages that have some additional bonus activities. So you shouldn't have any trouble doing some extra planning. Y is for you. It's important to remember that you are the face of the church for many young children who are coming to the parish community for the first time, or at least the first time in an environment that's designed especially for them. Your patience and warmth and kindness is going to speak volumes about who we are as Catholics. And finally, Z is for zany. It's important not to take yourself too seriously. Kids love slapstick and they love silly surprises. Pretending not to know things kids know is going to offer them a chance to share what they've learned and also lead to some good laughs as well. So that is the Allelu philosophy in a nutshell. Early childhood religious education from A to Z. And next we'll take you through some other elements of specific to the program. We'll unpack the different components of the Allelu program and also talk a little bit more about room arrangement and the stages of an Allelu lesson.